Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in us the fire of your love. Amen. Well, I can remember when I was a kid and we vacationed in Connecticut in the summer, there was there was like a beach store at the end of the road, maybe a mile down the road. And we'd go there frequently because they had penny candy and they had comic books, and it was just a nice thing to do in the middle of the day to walk down and get some kind of treat and burn our allowance. But by the end of the night, all the swimming we did, the black road that we walked up and down, like eliminated any clean feet we had from the swimming. So Mom would always make us wash our feet before we went to bed. And it was tricky because the cottage didn't have a bathtub. It had a shower underneath in the garage. So when it was time to wash our feet, it would be pointless to wash your feet in the shower in the garage and walk out and up because they'd be dirty again. So we would wash our feet in the bathroom sink. But it was one of those sinks that had a hot faucet and a cold faucet. And so you couldn't mix the warm. So you just had to fill up the sink and stick your feet in and hope you'd get your feet clean before the hot water got too hot. Otherwise you had to deal with the cold water. And so we'd kind of juggle between the two faucets and try to get clean feet to go to bed. And I thought of this today when I was thinking about this foot washing thing that Jesus did. It's such an intimate thing to wash feet and to wash somebody else's feet. It's one of the things I really like about the Maundy Thursday service because we do this thing that is not typical in our society. You know, in Jesus' day, people walked on dusty roads. You know, many roads weren't paved back then. I think by the end of the day, everybody's feet would have been pretty dirty. And this was a ceremonial thing. When you came into a house, you got your feet washed. The servant usually washed your feet, so you didn't track all the dirt into the house. And I can remember when I was in Madagascar thinking, wow, this is what it means to be dirt poor. Because the roads weren't paved, so everybody that walked around, and a lot of the people in Madagascar don't have shoes. And so you could see where at the end of the day, it would be important to wash your feet off before you went into the home. And I think I imagine that's the kind of environment Jesus was living in. But usually it was the servants that would wash feet. So when Jesus got up from this meal and took the bowl and the water and put a towel around his waist and decided to wash everybody's feet, of course Peter protested. He didn't feel like that was anything that his Lord should be doing for him. It was a servant's job. And of course, what does Jesus tell him? He says, well, if I don't wash your feet, then I have no part of you, no share in you. And of course, then Peter's going to jump all in and say, well, then do my head and my hand, hand is like, get my whole, and Jesus is like, no, you're missing the point. And I think we too can miss the point. Like this foot washing thing isn't necessarily about feet. It's about how do we serve one another. You know, that word Maundy comes from the Latin mandatum. I'm not saying that right, but it's a Latin word that means commandment. And that's the command that Jesus gave us, to love one another. And so how do we do that? How do we do such acts of service that we can show our love for the people we live with, for strangers? Right now, we're kind of on the receiving end of that kind of love because one of our younger friends, when she goes out to the store, checks in with us. Mike and I, it's weird to be in the at-risk category. But both of us are over 60, and I have a history of asthma, so I'm really, besides walking the dogs and being out in the yard, I'm really not going out into public places right now. But to have somebody call and say, hey, I'm going to the store, do you need anything? It's just this loving act of service. I reciprocate by reading her 2-year-old stories in FaceTime or playing her a song on the guitar. You know, there are ways that we can still reach out and connect. I mean, had this happened 10, 15 years ago, I can't even imagine how the church would have met. I never even heard of Zoom 15 years ago. I don't even know if it existed. If I had, I wish I would have bought stock in it, because everybody's Zooming now. But the point is there are ways, even while we're huddled separately in our homes, to still reach out, to call people, to let them know we care about them, to drop people notes. You know how good it feels to get something in the mail that's not a bill or junk mail? That's like a handwritten note from somebody that lets you know they're thinking of you. I mean, it's kind of almost a lost art in our society. But that's something while we're sheltering in place that each one of us could do. You know, we can call. I don't know a person in the church that doesn't have a phone. They can't call and check in on other people. And I know some people have been being very intentional about that. And I really appreciate that, because in the middle of Holy Week, honestly, I'm thinking about sermons. I'm not making a lot of phone calls this week. Next week, I'll be able to do phone calls. This week, it's been service planning and thinking of sermons and trying to figure out how to move church online. Margaret was a wonderful servant to me this week, helping me type up these liturgies. We would sit and plan them, and she's like, I got it. And she would send me the document and let me proof it, and she'd correct if there was anything wrong. Sue offered to be scrolling it on the screen so I didn't have to worry about it. Has sent me some kid-friendly. She found a great little Lego video of the Stations of the Cross that I can do with the kids tomorrow for the kid-friendly station. So there's, people are just stepping up in different ways to serve each other. It's an unusual time that we are living in, very unusual. And there's this thing about foot washing, this intimate thing that Jesus did that invites us into being more vulnerable with other people. I was reading a story in, I think it was the Christian Century. It was about foot washing, and this is written by Amy, I can't read my own writing, Frykholm, I think, Frykholm. But she talked about different experiences she had with foot washing in different parishes. And, some churches ignore it, don't do it at all. Others really get into it. And she spoke about, one of the churches she belonged to. She said, my church walks an odd line between a ritual foot washing and a pedicure. And she's like, they bring in big bowls of water and soap and lotion, and they really wash people's feet and then put lotion on when all is said and done. And she said she didn't know the history of that community when she first joined, but then there was this one time when this is a church in Colorado, St. George's Episcopal Church in Leadville, Colorado, and they would encourage people to leave their shoes at the door. And one day this newcomer came, and he had arrived for his first Maundy Thursday service straight from the woods, where he had been camping for the better part of the winter. He was hungry and dirty and quite anxious about how his feet and his whole body would be received. He apologized as he sat next to me at the meal that we would spread out in the sanctuary, but he ate gratefully. After supper, he said no to the foot washing, but sat on the side to watch the proceedings. He became intrigued and decided that foot washing actually might feel pretty good on his tired and aching feet. That day began Brian's life in the community. He became a regular volunteer at this community meal and church services. He became the person to grab the church laundry and bring it back clean. He made food deliveries. His life began to echo Jesus' words in John 13, if you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. The knowing began with warm water and a personal risk, and it grew from there. Foot washing at St. George retains, after all of these centuries, a hint of scandal. One year a homeless man named Kenny joined us for all the rituals of Holy Week. Even though he was drinking heavily and would soon die of liver failure, he had started to attend church with a quality of faithfulness that was no longer about his seeking our help. At the foot washing, he ended up seated next to the priest's tiny sprite of a daughter, who was about 5 years old. I felt some anxiety when I saw it, for it meant that as we went around the circle with each person washing the feet of the person next to them, Laura would wash Kenny's feet. I worried for both of them. Would she refuse to wash Kenny's feet? That would be completely understandable, but potentially humiliating for Kenny. Would he refuse to have his feet washed? That had happened so often. I could almost anticipate it, but Laura would probably misunderstand it. But when it was Laura's turn, she knelt down at Kenny's feet as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She lifted Kenny's feet into the basin of warm water, put soap on her hands, and washed his feet. Kenny laughed nervously and then began to cry. Then everyone began to cry except Laura, who continued her work in a businesslike manner with deliberate movements. She spread lotion on his feet with interest and attention as if painting with finger paints. Each year, foot washing produces a new strangeness, and the children perceive this far more than anyone. One year, a child decided to go into the kitchen and get her own basin and her own stack of towels. Everyone got 2 foot washings that year. Another year, children crawled around on the floor sniffing everyone's feet and giggling. Another year, my son came home from foot washing and announced that he was going to wash the feet of my husband, who had stayed home. He filled the dishpan with water and brought it to the TV room and washed my husband's feet in front of a beanbag chair. The children perceive something essential about foot washing, say something that is perhaps outside of the debate about its place in the church tradition. The combination of playfulness, incarnation, and marginality. The fact that their foot washing can be reinvented again and again. That is precisely what gives it power. Conducted out of a sense of obligation, as in the case of that poor that was from the beginning. The ritual loses its potency and its healing power, but by its very nature it is a ritual that most freely given and received in all its permutations of humility and intimacy. That's the end of the article. She had started the article talking about a priest who did it, but unceremoniously and uninterested and with kind of a look of disgust on his face, which would not really invite you to want to come and have your feet be washed. But in this case, she had experienced this whole other thing in a community that embraced the ritual, and even took tired, worn-out people that came in and treated them with a kind of tender love and care that Jesus treated his disciples. And really, that's what this commandment is all about. It's not about feet. It's not about dirty feet. It's about love. It's like, how do we love others? There are people in our homes, people in our sphere of influence, and some of our worlds have gotten really small as we're sheltering in place. I think that's a good thing. If we're going to get on top of this pandemic, we need to avoid each other for a while and not spread this virus. But there are still, like I said, ways that we can reach out in love and be Jesus to each other. And that's what Jesus calls us to do. He gave us a new commandment so that others would know we are his disciples. He said people will know we're his disciples if we have love for one another. I think about that little kid in that church washing the dirty feet of this man who had been in the woods for weeks. Who knows when his last bath was? And she just did it, with love and care. As a kid, when I came in from playing and I washed my feet in that sink, it wasn't an intimate or humble act. It was an act of obedience because Mom didn't want us to dirty up the sheets terribly because she was trying to reduce her laundry. But when you wash somebody else's feet or allow someone to wash your feet, there's a level of intimacy and care there. And I think that's the bottom line. Jesus is inviting us to be intimate with each other, to care for each other, to love each other in ways that might look unusual to the world, but that demonstrate a love like he had for us. May we look for ways and be creative about it because we are separated from each other right now. But may God inspire us with ways to serve each other from a distance. Because that's the gift that Jesus gave us besides the Last Supper that he celebrated with us and gave us a way to remember him at the table. He also gave us a way to remember him in acts of love. May he fill our hearts with his love and may we share it freely with those around us. Amen.